Vanakkam. Welcome to this course on classics in neuroscience. In this series of videos, we have been looking at functional organization of neurons. Specifically, in the last few videos, we have been looking at the functional organization of dendrites. In this video, we will look at the use of Goldstein again, revival of the use of Goldstein to study neuronal structure, specifically dendrites, and the study of dendritic spines. After the passing away of Santiago Ramon y Cajal in 1934, there was minimal further continuation of use of morphological approach or histological approach, or the approach that used Goldsteins. Later, people started using electrical methods, electrical stimulation and other such approach. Also, the use of electron microscope happened much later in 1950s. There was a resurgence of this line of work after the biophysical studies that were initiated by Wilfrid Rall and some anatomical investigations performed by David Sholl. We saw the contributions of Wilfrid Rall in the previous set of videos. Essentially, his work laid the foundation or the most important background for understanding and improving our understanding of the morphology of dendritic tree, where he used very intelligent or brilliant methods to reduce a very complicated dendritic tree into an equivalent cylinder. The details I am leaving for you to study on your own. Also, the crucial work of David Sholl, which he described in his monograph, widely read monograph called as a Organization of the Cerebral Cortex, 1956. This essentially recreated or rekindled interest in dendritic morphology. Also, the use of statistical approaches for characterizing synaptic connectedness in dendritic trees. Remember, the specific use of numerical methods to study dendrites was used by Wilfrid Rall. So, this was the time when statistical approaches, numerical approaches were being used by Wilfrid Rall and David Sholl and others. So, this revived, or there was a renewed interest in studying dendrites, essentially bringing the attention back to dendrites and dendritic spines. So, there was the use of these statistical approaches, and there was a modification of the original Goldsteining approach, because this was perhaps developed 80 to 100 years ago, quite a long time ago. So, there were these improvements to the Goldsteining approach, which was facilitated by David Sholl's work, that brought in other newer investigators into this. There was increased participation by others, led to a surge or renewed interest in this field of studying the structure of dendritic tree or the morphology of the dendritic tree. Also, there are variations in the structure of dendrites across types of neurons, where they are located, what type of neuron this is. Some neurons, like motor neurons, have dendrites that are smooth, but there are some other type of neurons like the pyramidal cells in the cerebral cortex that have characteristic spines. These spines that you see were also described by Santiago Ramon y Cajal long time ago, but exactly what do they do? This was not described by Ramon y Cajal or any others at that time. Crucially, this was described by a person named H.T. Chang, who did it much later. Initially, he started studying, H.T. Chang was from China. He studied auditory reflex of hedgehogs, which he published in the Chinese Journal of Physiology. In the good old days, there were visitors from the West who were hosted in China. For example, Walter Cannon went to China to contribute or to give lectures, for example, to the community of Chinese neuroscientists during Chang's time. Also, recording of synaptic potential in 1940 by T.P. Feng contributing to essentially early physiological, electrophysiological, neurophysiological studies in China. At that time, 1938 and 1939, when John Fulton's book on physiology, neurophysiology was received in China, H.D. Chang jokingly mentioned, one of these days I am going to study with Fulton. He studied the book, he read the book and he absolutely loved it. He was so inspired, he mentioned to his friends and colleagues that one of these days I am going to go and work with John Fulton. His friends were laughing because that was a very challenging time for China, because the Japanese had already attacked China. There was war going on between Japan and China, and it was extraordinarily difficult for a person from China to reach the United States. This mockery by his friends perhaps created more resolve in H.D. Chang, who somehow wrote to Fulton and asked, I am interested in working with you, what do you think? Surprisingly, he got a response in the form of a telegram saying that yes, letter follows. And the letter came a few months later, and he took this extraordinarily dangerous journey from Bombay to the United States in a ship. Somehow he survived the ordeal of traveling through the sea in wartime, and somehow he made it to the United States. The details I am leaving for you to read on your own. So, he somehow made it to Yale after several months of arduous and dangerous journey, and met Fulton. It was very characteristic of Fulton to encourage good talent when he saw. This is something that we all need to learn. If we are in positions of power, we need to support and encourage good talent when we see and recognize one. This is something that we can learn from others. So, he somehow reached Yale and started working. He worked on his PhD. In a couple of years he finished his PhD. Unthinkable, even in today's time, it's quite unthinkable. His thesis was 300 pages long. It was later transformed into 8 journal articles. 8 journal articles even in today's time is an extraordinarily productive PhD. In the good old days, it's just unbelievably productive. Chang was an extraordinarily productive personality. He was a prolific writer, he was an excellent experimentalist, and he published really fast and really well. So, he started focusing on dendrites. Earlier he was focusing on central synapses or central pathways, later he started focusing on dendrites in cerebral cortex. His approach essentially established the existence of dendritic potentials, and it differentiated them from other activity, intracortical neuronal activity. He published a whole series of papers on dendritic potentials between 1951 and 1955. This essentially stimulated or increased or renewed interest in dendritic studies. Also, there were others who contributed, Margaret Clare and George Bishop, early 1950s, who contributed to this line of work. So, essentially it can be summarized as H.D. Chang played a critical role in revamping or creating a renewed interest in dendrite research. He made some crucial observations on the properties of the dendritic spines and performed functional analysis on the types of neurons according to dendrites. This line of work continues to influence research even today on dendrites, providing how the dendrites work and what is the integrative function that they perform in very different contexts of neuronal networks. Chang showed that dendrites could be excited by electrical stimulation and transmit impulses. Unlike the all or none impulses that happens in axons, these potentials were rather not all or none, but rather graded potentials. Chang introduced this terminology gemmules, a name he gave for dendritic spines that highlighted its functional roles. He suggested that gemmules are acting as a mechanical barrier and reduce the amount of excitation that can happen in synapse, cause a delay and attenuate or reduce synaptic excitation due to their high ohmic resistance, because these are really thin cables or thin membranes. Unlike the axons which were myelinated, there were two reasons why the axons resistance would be different. They were myelinated axons, they were much thicker, larger diameter when compared with. As the diameter of the dendrite reduces, the resistance keeps increasing as you would expect. So, this was the crucial contribution made by H.T. Chang to the field of dendritic studies. With this, we come to the end of this video. In this video, we looked at the crucial contribution of Wilfrid Rall and David Sholl in reviving an interest in Golgi stain and their use in studying dendrites, and how dendritic spines were studied and described in great detail by H.T. Chang. With this, we come to the end of this video. Thank you for your attention.